Well, for more on this, I'm now joined live by Annie Machon. She's a former intelligence officer for MI5. Annie, the Pentagon's going to put 14 more missile interceptors in Alaska. That's about a 50% increase on the current numbers. And they're blaming the recent nuclear threats from North Korea. Is it really likely that Pyongyang will launch a nuclear strike?
It would be suicidal if he were to do that. What we're looking at this point is North Korea being the useful idiot, the pretext for America to defend a resource-rich part of the world. And when I was in MI5, the one thing we were always taught in terms of assessing a threat from any sort of source or a country, one, do they have the capability, and two, do they have the intention? Now, of course, North Korea has very loudly said they have the intention to try and attack America, but they certainly don't have the capability at this point. And even if they were to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, the nearest bit of America they would hit is only Alaska, and that's why I think America's citing these new defences in Alaska.
But Iran's always been a concern. Is it still not a major threat, or is North Korea now the enemy number one, as it were?
Well, it's always been a puzzle because, I mean, of course, both countries featured on George Bush's 5 Axis of Evil list all those years ago. But North Korea has always been much more belligerent. I think Iran, and this is the assessment of the entire US intelligence community, which came out in the National Intelligence Estimate in 2007, which was Iran had stopped trying to develop any sort of nuclear weapon capability in 2003. And this has been stood up time and time again since 2007. So we all know that Iran is not a real threat to America's interests. We all know it's not a threat to the West. And this fake shield they were trying to provide to Eastern Europe, because they would be in range of any missiles that Iran might be able to launch, was just a fake ploy, I think. It was used as an excuse. So it's interesting now that the focus is moving to an overtly aggressive but very small and incapable country away from Iran. But I hope it's not a feint to make people sort of stop watching Iran and stop watching the US government lies, trying to find an excuse to attack Iran.
Or then, if you say it's a fake threat for Eastern Europe coming from North Korea and Iran, how do you see the future of the anti-missile defence shield now in Eastern Europe? After all, now we're seeing blaming the lack of resources and also its effectiveness. That's why they're pulling out of Poland or not going ahead with the base in Poland. So how do you see the future of the AMD now?
Well, it's true. America is, effectively bankrupt as a country. I mean, if they're beginning to cut their military spending because they've militarily overreached, they're in serious problems because they haven't. That's the one thing they've never cut before. But certainly in terms of what they're doing in Europe, we have a situation where they are tacitly admitting that Iran is not a threat to Eastern Europe. And that's a problem. But the final point really on this one is looking at where the money goes when they try and develop a ballistic missile defense system. It has yet to be proven to work. Nobody knows if it works. Nobody can make it work yet. So effectively, ever since Ronald Reagan announced Star Wars way back in the early 1980s, what we've seen is this is a threat that's used as a cash cow that is milked by the defense industry, particularly Boeing, I believe, and Raytheon, who stand to make billions out of building these fake defense shields.
But nevertheless, symbolically, they are important. Russia, of course, not at all happy with the anti-missile defense shields there in Eastern Europe. Now, how will China react to what America's doing much closer in its backyard?
Well, that's going to be a very interesting question. It's almost like North Korea is the patsy. It's been put up as the reason to put these new defences in Alaska. And the key bit is, of course, there's been this covert war to control the diminishing resources of the world, not only rare minerals, but oil and all the rest of it, being waged across continents between certainly the US and China over the last decade. And what we're looking at now, I think, is a very careful geopolitical strategy to control and put bases in Alaska to protect Alaska, because anyone who protects and has Alaska can control the Arctic area. And as the Arctic begins to melt more quickly and more countries are going to fight for the resource-rich area as the ice recedes, then America, by having these defences in Alaska, will be very well placed to protect its economic interests in that area.
Interesting points. Annie Machon, thank you very much. Former MI5 officer joining us live there in Düsseldorf. Thank you.